Thanks very much, Greg. Well, in terms of hard acts to follow, I think Costa has got to be right up there. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the Gumbaynggirr people. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Costa. And pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I think one of the most important lessons that we can learn from the oldest enduring culture on Earth is how to live and even thrive within nature's limits, to live on nature's interest rather than to eat into its capital. I had the actor's dream the other night. It's an occupational hazard, or used to be, and it still lingers. In this dream, I'm about to walk on stage, and not only can I not remember the first line, but I don't really even recall what the play's about, and nobody will give me a script. It's not a very comfortable dream. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. There you go. I was caught back in that dream. So look, I guess I had this dream because I was in a bit of an agony of indecision about what to talk to you all about today. I mean, I'm no waste expert. I'm sure most of you in this room know vastly more about waste than I do. I'm a social scientist, as Greg said, and I'm an environmental educator. And what I can do is look at the research, apply a critical lens to it, and hopefully communicate it to you in a compelling way. At least that's what I'm going to try and do. Firstly, though, let's just see if I can get the direction of this right. Yes, I did. Good. Splendid. A little about Planet Ark. Planet Ark's vision is of a world where people thrive in balance with nature. And this word thriving is one that was coined by Kate Raworth in her seminal work, Donut Economics. Raworth posits that not only is endless growth impossible on a finite planet, but it's also unnecessary for humans and for the rest of nature to flourish. What we need is an entirely new system, one that is regenerative and distributive by design. At Planet Ark, we believe that in order to return to that state of balance with the natural world, we have to transition to a carbon neutral and circular economy. And our ambition and commitment is to help that transition in Australia by working collaboratively with governments, businesses, communities and individuals. Connecting the dots, if you like. That's what Planet Ark does. It's a connector, a bit like Costa. We're also concerned about a perceived alienation of people from nature, as more of us live in high-rise and spend time indoors attached to our screens. It's particularly a concern for children because we know that they are spending less time outdoors in unmediated play in nature. I talk to educators at Tree Day events, and for your information, Tree Day is in the last weekend in July, so please get involved. And these educators tell me about children who have almost no opportunity even to put their hands in the earth. And as a passionate gardener, I think that's a real tragedy. At the same time, we know about all the health and well-being benefits that are derived from spending time in nature, from reduced stress and anxiety, even reduced heart disease, to, particularly among children, increased cooperation, resilience and concentration. And we need to give our children resilience. We need to give them reasons to hope and to act, because obviously they are the environmental stewards of the future. So all of our programs and activities are connected to one or more of these three spheres: carbon neutrality, circular economy and connecting people with nature. But why a carbon neutral circular economy? Well, the global consensus is that in order to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees, and bear in mind that we've already added a degree of warming to the world, we need to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, switching to 100% renewable energy will get us 55% of the way to net zero. The remaining 45% will be achieved by radically changing the way we source, use and recover materials, by transitioning to a circular economy, in other words. Alarmingly, most of the important measures are going the wrong way. We're emitting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year, although there is some comfort in the fact that the rate of increase is reducing in some sectors and in some countries. According to Circle Economy's Circularity Gap Report 2023, we're now extracting, wait for it, 100 billion tonnes of materials from the earth every year. And unfortunately, at the same time, the amount of circularity on the planet is reducing. In the last 2 years, consumption jumped by more than 8%, but the circularity of materials fell from 9.1% in 2018 to 7.2% in 2023. And low-income countries have derived the least benefit from that growing global resource extraction. In fact, they continue to supply the primary materials to the wealthy countries and derive few of the improvements and benefits in terms of their own living standards. The growing consensus then is that we need to reduce that extraction of materials by somewhere between 30 and 50% by 2050, depending on who you talk to. And in further evidence of this redistribution of wealth from poor to rich, a recent report from the Australia Institute declares that inequality is on steroids. So why are we not more alarmed? Why do we not feel a sense of urgency about this? I fear that we're being lulled into complacency by what Martin Luther King called the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And that's partly in the stories that governments tell us and that we tell ourselves, that technological advances will save us. Unfortunately, some of those technologies that governments around the world are heavily relying on to get to net zero by 2050 are things like carbon capture and storage, which are unproven at scale and at the pace that we need. The harsh truth is that CCS is not going to cut it, and sadly, we are not going to get there by recycling. We can't recycle our way out of this. Now, I don't want to suggest that recycling is not important. In fact, Planet Ark built its reputation on encouraging people to recycle more and better. But it is a downstream solution to problems that have been created upstream. We need a whole of system change, and that starts with systems thinking. You may wonder what inequality has to do with the climate crisis. Well, apart from the moral imperative at a time when increasing numbers of our fellows are struggling to put a roof over their heads and food on the table, inequality has damaging environmental effects at both ends of the wealth spectrum. At the top end, we find that greater wealth leads to greater consumption. At the bottom end, people who are struggling with the housing and cost of living crisis, they don't have access to environmentally preferred products and services. What I think is most compelling to me about this graph is the almost complete inversion that's occurred in my lifetime. In the 1950s, when I was born, 96% of economic growth went to the bottom 90% of people, with the remaining 4% going to the top 10%. Between 2009 and 2019, those numbers had almost completely reversed, with only 7% of growth going to the bottom 90%, while the top 10% took 93% of the gains. What's also noteworthy, I think, is that the switch occurred with the worldwide embrace of neoliberalism in the 1980s, of Thatcherism and Reaganism, underpinned by the magical thinking of the trickle-down effect, what my dear departed mother used to call the rich pissing on the poor. The idea, of course, is that if you reduce the size of government and its role in regulating and taxing business, reduce the power of labour to unionise and withdraw for better conditions, you'll see a surge in enterprise and economic activity that will lead to the rising tide that lifts all boats. What we see here, unfortunately, puts the lie to that comforting notion. And what I find even more extraordinary is that Australia is now the most unequal of comparable countries, and I think a lot of that has to do with the cost of housing. So what has all this consumerism given us? Well, for Guy Rundle writing in Crikey last week, the $2 socks, the $5 lamps and the $100 flat screens are all that capitalism has to offer. The great Pez dispenser of existential sugar hits. One of the few advantages of being the age that I am is that I've lived as an adult through a time when social democracy was the norm. So I know that another world is possible. And so I encourage you to stay with me because there is cause for hope. Change is happening, and it's happening at a slower pace than we need, but I do remain hopeful that with a concerted effort, we can scale up all the good work that is being done. In the transition to carbon neutrality, for example, we need to follow Saul Griffith's advice and move rapidly to the electrification of everything, starting at the local level and with community renewal. One inspiring example up there in the top left is the IKEA Clean Energy Transformation Project in Adelaide. It's Australia's first urban solar power station. And it will transition IKEA Adelaide to operating with 100% renewable electricity by 2025. And that will also generate low-cost and clean energy for the Adelaide community. This is a partnership between Planet Ark Power, the South Australian Government, SA Power Networks and Epic Energy. And stage one of the project has installed 1.2 megawatts of solar onto the store's roof, and it's accompanied with a 3.4 megawatt hour on-site battery. And it's managed by Planet Ark's unique digital platform, Alexis Energy Management System. The beauty of this Alexis technology is that it contains hardware that smooths out the voltage variability that is inherent in renewable electricity generation, so that that energy will stay within statutory limits and be able to be fed back into a grid that was designed to be one way. So it's effectively turning a 19th and 20th century grid into a two-way grid. The second stage of this project, in the picture below, will be an EV charging station to be used by IKEA's customers and the employees and the delivery fleet. This will have shaded areas that are made from responsibly sourced wood, covered in solar panels, and the surplus energy that will be generated will be able to go back into the grid and will help IKEA achieve that 100% renewable energy generated on site. Citing renewable energy generation where it is used and taking advantage of the vast array of industrial rooftops close to urban centres makes so much more sense to me than spending billions of dollars on the poles and wires that is needed to transmit that energy from remote solar and wind farms. You only need to fly over the cities in this country to see how many rooftops there are that could be covered in solar panels, and using this specialist technology be able to do more than just supply the needs of that particular building. So if you've got one of those roofs and you're thinking of going to solar, please do come and talk to me. When it comes to our use of materials, we need to move up the ladder of R's. What we used to call the 3 R's of reduce, reuse and recycle. have now been expanded by Professor Jacqueline Kramer, former Dutch Environment Minister and doyen of the circular economy, to the ladder of 10 R's. And our focus should be on the top 6 of these, starting with refuse and reduce. And these are the calls to refuse unnecessary and gratuitous production and consumption, particularly in the use of virgin materials, and reduce both to only what is sufficient to meet our needs. Facilitating this reduction is upstream innovation to redesign our systems, our processes, and our business models. And we then move down the list to reuse, repair and refurbish and so on. And you'll note that recycle is second from the bottom, just above recovery of energy from waste to energy. They're the downstream processes where value has already been lost from the system. Part of that upstream innovation comes into play in the first 2 of the 5 business models of circularity, in the use of renewable, biodegradable and recoverable inputs into the design of products, into the shift to selling a service rather than a product. Subscription models like Netflix and Spotify have eliminated our need to own the thing in order to derive benefit from its use. Renting cars and other equipment are further examples that we have been living with for years and years. And implicit in this approach is a desire to extend the life of products through repair, remanufacture and resale to extract maximum value from their use. And research on consumers' choices actually suggests that consumers are more motivated by the durability of the products they're buying than even by the energy ratings on those products. Sharing platforms are another way of extracting maximum value by sharing products among several users. And finally, deriving additional value by keeping materials in circulation and thereby reducing the demand for new resources. So let's look at some of those business models in action, starting with the repurposing of buildings. And that's not merely at the cottage industry margins, although that work is really important, but this is in the commercial mainstream. This beautiful Quay Quarter Tower in Sydney sourced half of the materials in its construction from the building that it replaced. The reuse of those materials saved 7,500 tonnes of CO2 emissions from being released into the atmosphere, and the speed of delivery compared to a complete demolition and rebuild generated an estimated $130 million of additional value. Much of the needed change is happening gratifyingly, and I'm sure for a lot of you, at the local government level. And it will continue to be that way, with LGAs like the City of Ballarat setting the ambitious goal of being fully circular by 2050, and they're definitely not alone in that. And they envision that will provide economic prosperity, environmental health, and social well-being along the way. And social enterprises and not-for-profits are also key players in this transformation, like the Gold Coast Tool Library and Repair Cafe, demonstrating those twin business models of a sharing platform and product life extension. Along with governments, commercial enterprises and community groups, individuals and our consumption habits are key to connecting the dots. By becoming conscious consumers, we can avoid unnecessary purchases, favour the utility value of materials rather than their ownership, take care of the goods that we own to extend their life, and look to rehome goods for use by others rather than simply recycling them, or worse still, sending them to landfill altogether. Working in this field, it's an occupational hazard sometimes to give way to environmental anxiety and even to despair. But despite evidence to the contrary, perhaps, I do remain hopeful that we can achieve the transformation that, in the words of my dear friend and colleague Paul Klemenko, will require the greatest feat of collaboration the world has ever seen. Taking inspiration from American writer Rebecca Solnit, I distinguish hope from optimism. In her words, hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable, or an alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists. Optimists think that it'll be fine without our involvements. Pessimists take the opposite position. Both excuse themselves from acting. It's the belief that what we do matters even more, and how and when they matter, who and what they may impact are not things that we can know beforehand. And I'll leave you with one final thought of hers. Most of us would say, if asked, that we live in a capitalist society, but vast amounts of how we live our everyday lives are in essence non-capitalist and even anti-capitalist, full of things we do for free, out of love, and on principle. Thank you very much for your kind attention.